Michael said it the way men sometimes do when they believe no one will ever challenge them, like careless, like dropping ash from a cigarette. You'd be prettier if you smiled more. But the strange part isn't that he said it. The strange part is that you're the only one who knows what happened next. Because this isn't a story people tell out loud. It's the kind of thing that feels like an error in the system. A sealed file left open on the wrong desk, and now you're staring at it too late to look away. Too guilty to keep reading, but you can't stop. There's a weight in your chest right now, isn't there? Like the room has grown smaller. That's what happens when you realize you've stumbled into something no one meant for you to see. She didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't even raise her eyes. Her name was Claire, and she carried herself with a kind of quiet that unnerved people without them ever knowing why. That afternoon, she signed her name on a document that made her his boss, his owner, his undoing. But that's not the part that unsettles me. What unsettles me is what happened the moment the papers were inked. Michael's assistant swears he heard someone call his name from the corner of the room, but when he turned, there was no one there, only the faint sound of a woman's voice, too old to be Claire's, too broken to be human, saying something no one else seemed to hear. He won't repeat it now. He won't even admit it happened, except when he's drunk enough to forget he said it. And yet, here you are! Sitting with the one detail everyone else has tried to breathe away, Michael's face drained of color, the way his hand trembled on the pen, as though he recognized that voice, as though it had followed him from somewhere he swore he'd left behind. Nobody in the room has spoken about it since. Nobody asks why a man who mocked a woman at noon vanished by nightfall, his office left unlocked, his phone still glowing on the desk with a text half-typed, "Don't let her." But maybe the real question isn't what happened to Michael. Maybe the question is why Claire never smiled. Not once, even after the company was hers. Because if you look closer than anyone else has dared to see what they missed. A shadow behind her in every photograph. A reflection in glass that doesn't belong. And now, as you're hearing this, you should ask yourself something no one else ever has. What if the company she bought wasn't his at all? What if it was hers from the beginning? Till I do, you feel it too. That sick pull in your gut that maybe you were never supposed to hear this story. Because what comes next doesn't just change Michael's fate, it changes yours. Would you like me to continue this into the next sequence where the truth starts leaking through the smallest, most ordinary details, until the audience can't tell if it's paranoia or revelation? Claire did not smile when the papers were signed, not when the office erupted into false applause, not even when Michael's signature bled into a shaky line across the final page. The assistant's name was Paul, though he insists now it isn't swore. He heard the voice again. Only this time, it didn't call Michael's name. It said his. Just his. A sound that came low, like air sucked between cracked teeth. Familiar, yet impossible to place. He denies it in daylight, but in the recordings taken from the building's security feed, you can hear him mutter, "Stop saying it. Stop saying it," though no one is speaking to him. No one is near. The company tried to bury that tape. They replaced the system a week later, citing malfunction, yet every single file from that day remains corrupted. Not lost, corrupted. The video loops itself in fragments. Michael's pen hovering, Claire's hand resting still on the contract, the flicker of the office lights that shouldn't have been flickering. And if you watch carefully enough, frame by frame, there's something else. A figure leaning in the glass behind them. Too tall, too bent at the neck, with its mouth open wide as if people say the corruption created it. Just a smear of pixels. But if you look too long, you'll notice it blinks. And this is where the story starts to tilt. Because if I told you Michael disappeared, you'd nod. Accept it as another unsolved mystery swallowed by corporate silence. But here's the truth behind what no one tells you. Michael didn't disappear. Not exactly. His phone was still logged into the building's Wi-Fi 2 days after he was last seen. The IT logs confirm it. Only his phone was never recovered. His laptop, however, turned up weeks later in the trunk of his own car parked 3 blocks from his apartment. The files on it were intact, but his calendar was wrong. Dates shifted backward, meetings listed for days that hadn't yet come. His own handwriting and notes for conversations he couldn't have possibly had, and threaded through every single day of the coming months. Written over and over in the margins. Claire doesn't smile. Now you're wondering if she planned this. If she orchestrated some long game, some revenge no one could track. But what unsettles me is simpler and stranger. Every time I've tried to confirm the assistant's name poll, Isidate comes up different. In HR files, he's Richard. On his tax forms, he's Daniel. In the photograph taken at the signing, the one printed in the local paper, his face doesn't match any employee at all. When I asked Claire about him once, she stared too long and said, there was no assistant. Not that day! And here is where paranoia finds its grip. If you're listening closely, if you're catching the details, people skim over, you'll notice something else. Audio glitches. In the recordings! Whenever Claire's name is spoken, there's static, only hers. The sound stutters, cuts, then resumes, as if her presence cannot be carried cleanly through wires. It leaves gaps, silences that hum in your ears until you start to fill them yourself. Some claim they hear a second voice riding under hers, layered and broken, like a radio tune between stations. Others deny it, insisting it's only compression. But late at night, when I play it back alone, I hear my own name whispered. Yours, too, if you dare lean close enough. Maybe this is trauma, a collective break in memory. Michael had a history, they say. A brother who vanished years before, a father whose obituary carried the wrong date of death, records that never align, names that change depending on who you ask. Maybe Claire is nothing more than a mirror held too close, a woman who never smiled because she was forced to carry a truth too heavy. Or maybe she's not a woman at all. Not in the way we understand. A second character enters here, though calling him that feels misleading. His name is David Datleese. That's what he gave me. He claims to have worked with Michael years before. Says he saw this pattern forming, the bending of time and record. The bleeding of memory into something that doesn't obey the rules we pretend to live by. He hands me folders filled with clippings, transcripts, notes scribbled in ink so frantic the paper nearly tears. But the handwriting is identical to Michael's. And the dates, they mark meetings that haven't yet happened. David is unreliable. He vanishes between conversations, returns with stories that contradict themselves. One night he insists Claire bought the company to destroy it, to pull it down from within. The next he says she saved it from collapse, that Michael was already gone before the ink touched paper. Sometimes he swears he's never met her at all. And yet, in his pocket, he carries a photograph of the signing day. Claire's face is blurred in it, just a smear of light. But Michael's expression is clear to her, wide-eyed, as though he was staring at something no one else could see. You think you're safe? Listen to this? That the story lives on the page, the screen, the speaker. But real, unsolved mysteries never sit still. They reach through. They leave you asking questions at odd hours. Questions you're not supposed to have. Like why, after that day, no one can find a single image of Claire before the purchase. Like why, when I search for Michael's assistant again, the name in the record changes once more. And why, as you're hearing this, you're certain you've seen her too somewhere. In a reflection, in a crowd, in a dream that never felt like yours. They don't want you to remember this, but you already do. That's why you're uneasy now. Why you've glanced at the corner of the room twice. Why you're replaying her name in your head to check if it glitches there. 2. Tell me, did you hear it just now? That faint sound in the background? Like a breath pulled too close to the mic. Because I didn't add it. And here's the left turn you weren't expecting. What if Michael never vanished? What if you've mistaken whose story this really is? Because if you listen carefully, if you slow the recordings down to the right frequency, you'll hear a voice that doesn't belong to any of them. It's yours. Asking a question you don't remember saying, and the last line, the one they never let you read until now, is sitting on the final page of Michael's journal. Asterisk, she bought my company, but she didn't buy me. I am still here, right behind you. Do you want me to carry this deeper into Michael S.'s voice itself, like fragments of his journals or recordings start surfacing, blurring whether he's alive, dead, or speaking through the audience? 4 weeks. Claire pretended not to notice the eyes on her, the whispers in the halls, the invisible pressure building in the space between her and every clock on the wall. The company was hers now. That much was certain, and certainty felt like a fragile kind of mercy. Lawyers confirmed it. Contracts confirmed it. Even Michael's family distant. Brittle voices on the phone confirmed that he'd left no trail behind. No claim, no fight. By all appearances, the mystery was solved. Michael had broken, cracked under the weight of his own arrogance, and vanished into whatever silence men like him eventually find. And yet, when Claire allowed herself to breathe, to almost believe in resolution, the lie revealed itself in the smallest, cruelest detail. It began with the file, a simple personnel record buried in the archives, one of the thousands she now technically owned. A folder marked with Michael's name, stacked between memos from years before, brittle pages half erased by time. She opened it, expecting routine employment history, numbers, legal scraps, and instead found something else. A photograph. Not of Michael! Not of the company! A child's photograph, blurred at the edges, stamped with the date, 1989. A boy standing in front of a red door. The name typed neatly beneath. Asterisk, Michael Reynolds, age 7. At first, this felt like nothing more than a forgotten relic of HR until she noticed the handwriting on the back. Sharp, familiar, hers. Don't smile for them. Her hands shook, but she told herself there had to be an explanation. Perhaps it was coincidence. A recycled folder. A mistake in the archiving system. That's what people say when the ground begins to tilt beneath them. They whisper explanations to themselves like prayers. But then came the second photograph. Same boy, same door, older by only a year. And this time, behind him, blurred almost into invisibility, was the faint outline of a woman. No face, no features, just a shadow caught mid-step. Claire dropped the photo on the floor and heard herself whisper aloud, as though in a memory she'd forgotten she owned. I told you not to smile. 4 days she tried to push it down. She asked David, the unreliable man with too many answers, about the photographs. He looked at them too long, then claimed he remembered nothing. Hours later, drunk and slurring, he admitted he had seen that door before, but not in this building. Not in Michael's childhood home. He had seen it in his own dreams decades earlier, painted in the exact shade of red. That door doesn't open, he said, weeping into his glass. It only waits. And so, Claire convinced herself the truth was simple, that she had uncovered the hidden truth everyone else had been too afraid to see. Michael S. vanishing wasn't corporate sabotage, wasn't revenge. It was a return. He had gone back to that door, back to whatever lived behind it. The mystery was solved, she told herself. If she could find the house, she could close it all off, end the cycle, silence the static in her ears. For a moment, even you might have believed her. She drove 3 hours out of the city, guided only by fragments David didn't remember telling her. She found a tan abandoned home at the edge of a dead-end road, its paint peeling but the door still impossibly bright. A memory glitch, standing whole against decay. Inside, the air tasted stale, layered with dust and something metallic. The rooms were empty except for scraps of paper scattered across the floor, fragments of notes written in Michael's frantic hand. Asterisk, don't let her smile! Don't let her speak! Don't let her asterisk the words cut off, repeating again and again, circling the margins of pages until the ink bled through. This was it, Claire thought. The mystery uncovered the source of everything. But the false resolution unraveled in a single detail, a sound from upstairs. A creak, deliberate, weighted, as though someone was shifting their weight just above her head. She froze, every part of her body, remembering a sound she couldn't name, a sound she knew she had heard before, in another house, another year, another life. She whispered Michael's name, though she didn't mean to, and then she saw the photograph she hadn't expected, lying in the dust at her feet. A family portrait, faded and scratched, but unmistakable. There was Michael, his parents, and a girl standing just to the side. The girl was her. Claire. A child with the same eyes, the same tilt of the jaw, caught in the same frame as a family she did not remember. Her breath caught as the edges of her memory burned, rewriting themselves in real time. She was not supposed to be there, and yet she always had been. This was not Michael's story. It had never been. This was hers. Or, worse, it was both, intertwined, collapsing in on itself like a reel splicing scenes from two films into one. The disturbing event from the past had returned, not mirrored, but identical. The missing boy, the silent girl, the door that never opened yet, was always waiting. She had lived it before. You had to, if you're honest with yourself. The recognition curdled in her stomach. This wasn't discovery. This was recovery. And just when the mind begins to accept, to brace itself for the weight of such revelation, something darker presses through. A force that does not belong to names or faces, that does not need introduction. It had been watching all along, patient, circling the periphery of every photograph. Every recording, every lapse, in memory. It moved not in footsteps or shadows, but in the silence between words. The pauses in speech. The static bursts that force you to replay a tape, just to check if you imagined it. You've felt it before, haven't you? That sensation that someone is looking over your shoulder when you read too late at night. That moment when you hear your name, but no one has called it. You're not crazy, they lied to you. Claire tried to run from it, but her own memory betrayed her. Rooms shifted behind her, stairwells doubled back, photographs reappeared where she had just stepped. She clawed her way out into the air and found herself back in the office, the signing day frozen around her. Michael's pen hovered. David stood watching. And there she was, seated across the table, but it wasn't her, not exactly. It was someone wearing her face. Someone who finally smiled. The twist isn't that Michael disappeared. The twist isn't that Claire's past bleeds into his... The twist is that the story you've been following, every document, every glitch, every voice caught on tape has already happened exactly this way. Before, you just don't remember living it. And now, as you replay it in your mind, detail by detail, you'll notice what was hidden in plain sight. The voice you thought was Michael's in the corrupted files. Play it back slower. It isn't his. It's yours. Do you want me to carry this into the fourth chapter where the force watching finally makes itself felt through the audience? Own perspective, twisting their role in the story. They are not alone. The first time Claire understood that, it was not through sight, but through a text that arrived at 3 a.m. on a phone. She thought she had left in a different jacket. The message had no sender, only a string of numbers and a single image attached. A snapshot of the office signing day. Grainy edges burned as if from old film, and someone had circled Claire's hand where it rested on the contract. Scrawled across the bottom, in a handwriting that made her stomach drop, was 3 words. She had said aloud only once in the Red House, and had never told another soul. Dan T. let her. She almost deleted it, assumed a prank, but the timestamp matched the second after she had woken from a dream in which a child had been calling her name from behind a door, painted red, and in the dream the voice had carried a code or Dan. When she replayed the text, she realized that numbers at the top matched the latch pattern on that door. That is how it begins for most of them. A wrong-time message that feels like an answer to a wrong-time question. The kind of answer that rearranges everything you thought you knew about coincidence and selection, and who is allowed to remember what. Once you let that first message breathe, the world tilts and collects more of them. They arrive as found footage from 20 years ago shipped anonymously to inboxes and basement. Pull boxers, granny tapes bearing dates that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Because the faces on screen are people you recognize, but younger, or older, or wearing the expression you have only ever seen in the mirror when you wake up mid-cry. They arrive as photographs pinned to corkboards in apartments of strangers who, upon cross-checking, discover the same red door in the background. Appearing everywhere from commuter rail stations to family reunion snapshots, sometimes upside down, sometimes reflected, sometimes as negative space where a face should be. They arrive as little folded papers slipped under the doors of motel rooms. Phrases typed, then handwritten over until the ink bleeds into an unreadable prayer phrases like you were right all along and what the government never released. And this is not the first time you have remembered The people who receive them, teachers, mail, carriers, an ex-Marine named Luis, who keeps his answers short and says nothing at all when asked how he recognizes the handwriting. Begin to see each other by accident on platforms designed to keep strangers safe and anonymous. And then they begin to answer. When they answer, they are careful. The communications mutate like a language rebuilding itself under pressure, a pictogram of a cracked clock. A smear of white paint in the shape of an eye, a pattern of numbers that, when plotted on a map, draws the outline of the red door. Shared dreams begin to thread through their nights. Not identical, but overlapping enough to suggest a single mind has been distributed across separate bodies. One woman in Ohio dreams of the smell of wet newspaper and wakes knowing exactly what the woman in Seattle tasted on her tongue at 3 a.m. A man in Tucson dreams a melody he cannot place and hums it at a coffee shop where another of them writes it down in their notebook without ever having met the humming man before. They begin leaving symbols. A tiny X beneath coasters in diners. A smudged crescent on the inside of library books. A sticker of an unremarkable barcode peeled from a package and placed atop a subway map. Each symbol is a key that fits into no lock anyone can find, but together they map a repetition and architecture of memory glitches. And repetition, a spoor of a thing that prefers to move in the spaces between people. You, if you are listening, become a participant by accident and then by design. The broadcast that brought you here contains a frame that is not in the public records. A single still of Clarice's profile at the table, the background warped by compression, a shadow that should not exist. Viewer starts a message the uploader with the same urgent tone reserved for conspiracies at 2 a.m., each claiming they see something else, an emblem on the arm of the figure leaning in the glass. A symbol the uploader had not noticed until 3,000 people pointed it out in the comments. A circle split by a vertical line, faint as a fingerprint. Someone posts a map overlay that shows where similar circles have been photographed around the country. Someone else cross-references the maps with obscure municipal building permits and finds a string of approvals for demolition on properties that never existed. The thread grows into a forum where strangers trade dream phrases like contraband. Where a retired archivist posts scans of microfiche from a county that has no record of births for a 3-year span, and someone replies simply with the coordinates of a motel. You click the motel coordinates? You do not mean to, but you click. And then there is the observer, the third perspective, who speaks in a voice that makes you pause because it feels less like exposition and more like confession. He calls himself Elias, or so he says when he leaves, comments in late-night threads and signs them with a pair of numbers that, when converted, spell a different name, entirely names that are familiar because you have heard them in fragments during dreams and in the crackle between radio stations. Elias claims to have been watching longer than any of them. His language is measured. His posts precise in a way that suggests an intelligence cataloging error in real time and attempt to create a ledger of what is being lost. He posts images of objects no one else has seen. A child. A shoe with a tiny symbol pressed into the sole, a rusted key with teeth filed down to match a pattern that appears in no lockbooks, a Polaroid of a birthday. Cake with candles arranged in the same split-circle pattern. He admits without melodrama that he does not understand the force at play, only its effects. The way memory folds. The way names slide off records like wax. The way people who try to tell the truth find their stories altered on playback. He warns, and the warning is the most human thing he offers, that the danger is not interested in bodies so much as continuity. It eats sequences. It edits the narrative. It prefers the quiet dissolution of identity to spectacle. At first, his posts are treated with the same skeptical amusement reserved for every amateur investigator who finds a pattern and insists it is a map to truth. But then, users begin matching the unpolished details. Elias posts an ink smudge, a particular cadence of punctuation in an old email to documents that have been scrubbed from archives and to CASSETTE, tapes rescued from dumpsters behind law firm buildings. The things he shares are not dramatic. They are small, domestic, the kinds of things you expect to find in drawers and between couch cushions. Grocery lists with a name crossed out, a receipt with a time that does not exist, an appointment card for a doctor who no longer practices. That lists a patient number later revealed to match the badge number of someone in a photograph of the signing day. Each confirmation is quiet and accumulative. And these confirmations change the tone of the forum from conspiracy to community, from notes on the wall to a living ledger of people who remember the same wrong thing. You will notice, as the thread grows, a change in how people speak to one another. At first, they trade symbols and coordinates in public, as if afraid of being overheard, even online. Later, they begin sending private messages, encrypted threads. Images layered with alt text containing instructions maps of how to listen when a tape glitches. How to slow audio to find a hidden syllable. How to align frames of corrupted video until a shape emerges from the noise. They start to leave physical marks in the world. A paint smear shaped like an eye on the back of a stop sign. A single playing card wedged under the windshield wiper of a parked car. The marks are not vandalism so much as language, clandestine grammar that only the remembered can read. And as the marks spread, their effects ripple. A woman in Pennsylvania checks the underside of a park bench and finds a small, folded paper crammed there that reads in block letters. You are not the first to forget this. Do not trust the mirror. She brings the paper to the forum. 10 others show up over the next week with the same folded paper found in different states. Patterns pile on patterns until the believers can no longer pretend they are alone. And yet, even in the communal panic, the force at play does not step into the light. It watches with a patience that feels designed by someone who understands boredom. The more eyes that look, the more it tightens its edits. Uploads get corrupted in the same way, with the same stuttering around names. Search results begin to cycle, returning pages already viewed. Caches refuse to show older versions. Comments disappear from threads, later to reappear with rewritten phrasing that alters meaning by a single word. People discover deleted posts with content swapping. A plea that once read "help her" now says "hide her." And the change is subtle enough to pass as a typo to anyone scanning in daylight. The effect is a slow nihiling out of testimony. A reduction of memory to a palimpsest, where the original script has been replaced by something nearly identical and yet fundamentally different. Between the private messages and the public posts, a rhythm emerges. Cryptic messages sent at precise intervals, shared dreams overlapping in time with those intervals, and visual symbols that line up on maps as if plotting a constellation of events. Elias writes that the alignment is not geographic, but temporal. The symbols mark seams between moments, places where the force can more easily unpick continuity. He posts a photograph of an old courthouse clock with hands that do not align to time and notes that where the hands stop, the thread of memory phrase just enough to slip. A user follows the coordinates and films the clock. The clip loops and, in the loop, for a second it shows a figure in the doorway who is not in frame when the video is shot in real time. The clip is screenshotted, slowed, examined by dozens. None of them can agree on who the figure is. Only that the familiarity of the face is bone deep and that the figure seems to be looking at them from the future. You begin to understand what they mean when they say you were right all along. The phrase is not triumph, but recognition. It is the sigh of people who have stumbled back toward a memory erased by an efficiency that prefers its own silence. You begin to feel that the thing watching is not a singular monster but a system. An appetite for narrative control that edits memory the way a censor edits a speech, smoothing out inconsistencies until the past becomes polite and forgettable. The terror is not in spectacle but in erasure, and the horror in realizing that the only true resistance might be to remember in public, to keep insisting on the wrong version of events, until the world cannot bear to overwrite the noise of 1,000 witnesses. The final image Elias posts, before going silent for 3 days, is a photograph of a row of mailboxes at dusk, each one bearing a tiny, identical, sticker the split circle, symbol placed in the same lower corner, scribbled underneath in pencil coordinates. Thousands of users map the coordinates and find nothing, just fields, abandoned gas stations, the occasional farmhouse. But one user, a woman who signs her posts with the initials LM, drives out to the third coordinate and posts a shaky video of a porch light flickering in the rain and a single shoe on the stoop. She zooms in with a hand that trembles and shows the camera what is pressed into the shoey's sole. The same split circle stamped, worn thin by age. She breathes into the mic and says, very quietly, the words the forum has been forgetting to say aloud. They knew we would look. The thread explodes into a chorus of confirmations and denials, plans and fears, until the server slows under the weight of it and fragments begin to drop away. In the last messages, people tag one another in clumsy, pleased to meet in person, to exchange lists and photographs to stop the slow editing of their lives. Plans are made and canceled. Meeting places are rearranged and then erased from calendars. And while they argue, while they try to build a human chain against a machine that edits memory, the thing watching adjusts. It learns their language. It begins to leave its own notes. Tiny corrections slipped into the margins of uploaded documents. Alterations that make the original testimonies read like dreams. Elias posts once more, late and short, with a line that feels like a door swinging closed. If you are reading this and you remember what they erased, do not respond in the thread. Leave a mark where only they would not look. They are patient, but they are not careless. We are still here. We are being counted. Be careful who you trust with your name. Then he posts a photograph of a mirror he claims to have found in a vacant schoolhouse. The glass is clouded, and in the fog, someone has written a single word with a finger. The photo focuses, blurs, comes back into focus, and the word reads differently depending on how long you stare. Some see remember, some see return, some see nothing at all, as if the mirror itself refuses to host a particular truth. The thread ends, for now, in motion. A rising chorus of voices trying to anchor their pasts against a force that prefers the quiet deletion of identity, and a community learning to speak in symbols and slept-on phrases. The last frame you are given, the last image pushed into the feed before the server's throttle and the video drops in and out of resolution. Shows a hand to your hand, perhaps, or someone else is pressing a sticker with a split circle onto the back of a library book. The camera lingers as the hand pulls back, and where the sticker sits, the cover seems to glow. Not with light, but with something like recognition. As if the book has remembered being read wrong all along. You realize, with a cold clarity, that this is not merely a story about a woman who bought a company and a man who vanished. It is an invitation. It asks whether you will be a witness who speaks, a witness who hides, or someone who lets the edits continue in the quiet. It asks whether identity is a thing you own or a story others can rewrite. And as you hesitate, trying to decide which role you will take, the feed stutters, the image unspools, and for a single terrible second the screen goes black and you hear not from the speakers but in your own head a voice that has been answering in the margins for years. Say with terrible tenderness, remember this. They were watching before you were born. Michael had always thought that power was measured in the size of the building you walked into. The number of signatures that trailed after your name, or the volume of silence that followed your decisions. But now, standing in the glass shell of a skyscraper that bore his reflection on every surface, he understood power. Differently, it was not what you held, but what you surrendered. And for the first time in his life, he wondered if he had already given away more than he knew, piece by piece, until only a hollow echo remained. The officer should have felt like a triumph. Everything gleamed with impossible polish, as if the place had been staged for him alone, as though no one had ever breathed here before. Yet, every time he turned his head, he swore the reflections in the glass shifted too slowly, lagging a beat behind his movements. He told himself it was exhaustion. He told himself it was stress. But some small voice one that had been quiet for decades kept whispering that something was terribly wrong. It was that voice that led him to the file. The folder hadn't been there before. And yet, when he reached for it, his hand trembled with the certainty of recognition. His own handwriting stared back at him, looping across pages he didn't remember writing. Whole sections of his life spelled out in conversations he'd had, arguments he'd lost, the exact words Elise whispered before she vanished. Yet one entry froze him more than the rest. Asterisk, February 8th. Do not forget. Again. The sentence was underlined 3 times, written with the kind of desperate pressure that tore the paper. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't remember ever forgetting. And yet his chest ached with a sharp pain of recognition. He thought he had found the truth. The journal was supposed to explain everything: the missing hours, the shifting faces, the voices bleeding through static. It was the answer, the map back to who he was. But then he saw it. A single phrase written in a different hand, darker, sharper, cutting across his own words like a wound. She knows what you did. Michael closed the folder, but the damage was done. A flood of memories surged back, not clear, not whole, but jagged, broken, as if his mind had been shattered and the pieces rearranged. He remembered being a boy, hearing his mother's voice through the radio weeks after she was buried. He remembered a locked room at the edge of town, one his father said never existed, where the wallpaper shifted like skin. He remembered Elise looking at him in the boardroom, her smile so calm it chilled him, and saying, "You've already forgotten once." That's why I'm here. He wanted to believe this was trauma, a glitch of the brain, nothing more. He wanted to believe he was still sane, still tethered to a world that obeyed rules. But the pages said otherwise. His memories said otherwise. And when he looked out the window, down at the street far below, he saw faces staring up at him. Not strangers, not pedestrians. Faces he knew, faces he had seen in dreams. They looked up as if waiting, as if they had always been waiting, and one by one they raised their hands, as though signaling him to remember. He staggered back from the glass. His breath hitched, shallow and uneven, and he pressed his palms to his eyes as though to block out the vision. But when he lowered them, there was someone standing in the office with him. A man he didn't know, or perhaps knew too well. His suit was immaculate, his posture unyielding, but his eyes were hollow, and Michael felt a nauseating wave of familiarity crash through him. "You've been looking in the wrong direction," the man said softly. "It isn't about what happened. It's about why you needed it to happen." Michael wanted to ask who he was, but his throat locked. Deep down, he already knew. The face was not a stranger's. Not fully it was his own, aged differently, scarred in ways he could not yet account for. The man reached out, not with menace, but with something like sorrow. "You built all of this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not to win! Not to own! You built it to forget." The words cut deeper than any revelation, because Michael remembered. Then, he remembered the choice he made years ago to bury something unspeakable under layers of success, noise, distraction. He remembered the night Elise appeared in his life, not as a stranger, but as a shadow from that buried past, watching, waiting for him to slip. And he remembered the warning he wrote to himself in the journal. Do not forget again. The truth wasn't about her, or the company, or even the strange glitches in reality. The truth was about him, the person he had been, the things he had done, and the unbearable weight of memory. He thought uncovering it would free him. Instead, it made him realize he had built his entire life around hiding from himself. "Tell me," Michael whispered, his voice raw. "Tell me what I did." But the other him only shook his head, tears shining in his eyes. "If I tell you, there's no going back. You see the world for what it really is, and it 1T lets you leave again!" Michael collapsed into the chair, his body trembling, the room spinning with reflections that no longer matched his movements. He was caught in the unbearable paradox. To know the truth might destroy him, but to deny it meant living a life that wasn't his own. The choice was irreversible. Outside, the faces still waited. Silent. Expectant. A crowd of witnesses he had never met, and yet somehow always known. And as he stared back at them, Michael felt something inside him begin to fracture like a dream breaking open. Like a self he had forgotten, clawing its way to the surface. For a long time, he said nothing. The silence grew heavy, unbearable, until it felt as though the entire building was listening for his decision. Then, finally, he whispered not to the man who was him, not to the faces below, but to himself. "I don't want to forget anymore." The lights flickered. The glass warped. The reflection in the window leaned forward, even though he hadn't moved. And in that unbearable moment, Michael realized that the story he thought was about Elise, or the company, or even the mystery of memory itself, was only ever about him. His own reckoning. His own unbearable truth. And somewhere in that collapsing silence, as though carried on a current older than time, he heard the voice again. His mother's voice, impossibly tender, impossibly near. Asterisk, Michael! You don't need to remember what you did! You need to remember why. Asterisk, the room went dark. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.